Hey everyone, thanks for coming. My name is David Katleski. I'm going to moderate this session. This is the last session in 2C, Brewing Operations, Innovate to Elevate, Creativity and Experimental in Brewery that Drives Profits. So if you were looking for the Pink Boots Society meeting, this is not it. That was before us. And I didn't go this year to be kicked out intentionally because I usually try to go and they kick me out. But for those of you that know Kyle, maybe you know Kyle, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Ross came from Portland, Oregon, and he just gave us a great compliment, which is he goes to many of the guild events across the country, and he thinks this is one of the top of all the guild events. And I attribute a lot of that to Paul Leone, who's done an astronomical job putting together an amazing team and has really grown the New York State Brewers Association into what it is today. So without further ado, I'll just let Kyle and Ross take over, and they could give you a brief on who they are and what they do and how they could benefit your company.
Cool. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. We're going to try and keep it very slide light today. Hopefully there's more conversation, so don't hesitate to interrupt, jump in. Let's make it more of an open conversation. That's part of the theme of what I want to talk about today with Ross is how vendors can be there for you and help explore some of this stuff that's out there. So I'm happy to dump my slides and we just have a cool chat if that's the way the conversation starts to go. So Ross, why don't you just do a quick intro for yourself with this sweet headshot you got there?
That is a sweet headshot. I'm Ross Hunsinger. I'm the brand director for Abstrax hops. Everything we do is kind of like my baby brainchild, and I've been there since day one and keeps progressing and finding myself doing kind of everything related to new innovations, to user experience and how people experience the brand as a product and as a social media presence, kind of all the stuff. So.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed getting to know Ross, and I think one of the big things between our two brands, and he and I personally, is we're really heavy on how we can provide education and not just a product to all the people that we're working with. I mean, even when I get on calls with breweries, like my hope is obviously I want to try and get you to start using the product, but ultimately I want to hopefully provide some information, some things that I'm seeing out in the industry, and that's going to be a little bit of the theme today. And that's a lot of what I see with Abstrax too. So that's why I thought it was cool for us to partner on this today. So quick intro on my side. I run the sales for Ollie over at Next Glass. If you're not familiar with Next Glass, we have Untapped, Hop Culture, Beer Advocate, Osner, and then Ollie, which is our software that we do for breweries. But I managed breweries in New York City for about 10 years. I was the president of the New York City Brewers Guild for 2 years as well. So, being here at the State Festival, like this is all ingrained in me. This is like, you are my people as well. Like you're my community outside of just working with. So I'm always happy to take part in these and be around and see how I can provide some help. So just wanted to, you heard a lot from Julie this morning. I thought she gave a great keynote. And I thought this presentation actually, coincidentally enough, can build a little bit upon that, right? Because it's no secret what we're all dealing with out in the industry, right? It's hard out there right now. It's not the way that life was in 2017 and 2018. I hear it from every brewery that I talk to, right? The landscape has shifted. And we're all facing new challenges every day, specifically like rising costs and competition. And consumer preferences seem to be like literally every day something new is changing or coming up that we have to think about. But the biggest thing I've been taking away in the last year is how do we thrive, not just survive? Because I'll get on the call with a brewery and I'll be like, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to get through the next day. And I'm like, yeah, I definitely want to help you with that, but I want you to feel like you're actually progressing. You're not just treading water. And so that's kind of where I wanted to take today's discussion. And building off of what Julie talked about today, right? It's these days you have to run a good business. It's not just about having your hobby, but I don't want you to lose that part of why you got into the business, right? It's still important for you to embrace that creative aspect, the innovation aspect of why you became brewers or you got involved if you're not actually one of the brewers. And so how can you do that while still adapting and changing and embracing all these things that are happening and driving profit, which is, of course, as Julie mentioned today, so crucial to today's market. So that's what we're going to kind of dive into a little bit today, and Ross especially, because he's talking with a lot of breweries as well, and I thought he was a good person to bring in as he's taking his product and talking about creativity and ways to approach beers differently than we maybe have before. So he'll be able to provide a lot of insight there too. So I just want to kind of set the stage a little bit of like, what happens when brewing under stress. And, the first thing, and this is all kind of just basic science. I'm going to try and run through it really fast because this is the boring stuff. But we all go into fight or flight mode. And I see this when I get onto Zoom calls. My life exists on Zoom, unfortunately, these days. But I'll see a brewer come on, and you can see the circles under their eyes, or they're just kind of like, they're the taproom manager quit last night, and they're just trying to like hold everything together. And it's just like I can't even think far enough ahead. I'm just trying to like hold everything together, right? And it's, when you go into that fight or flight mode, the stress triggers, you can read all this stuff. I'm not going to sit here and, force you to read. But basically, just kind of like the scope of everything you're thinking about narrows into I just got to keep my head above water, right? And I want to try and help everybody see today that there's ways to tread water, but then get into actually swimming and having fun again, right? So we can get out of that. So the other thing is just limited cognitive resources. When your brain goes into stress mode, right? Your brain goes, I got to just deal with this. I can't even think about complex creative processes. Like, how do I approach a new recipe, or how do I retool my recipe for more efficiency, right? And the other thing is just mentally exhausted, physically exhausted, right? Stress just drains that out of our body. So that's what's happening. And I see this anybody out there can you feel like you've been in this position where that stress is, you're just tired because it feels like, the industry's just hitting you from all different corners, right? Anybody agree with me? Yeah. I felt like I see this every day.
I was afraid you were talking about me until you said brewers. I was like, very cool.
But it's just the way it is. It's the industry right now. But there are ways that we all can gather together. And specifically, I want to point out, like, the vendors are here for you. And I'll talk a couple of places about that. Like, we're here to help you and help you guys figure out what's the next thing. How does this fit into your brand? Are you exploring things like non-alcoholic THC seltzers as New York potentially, starts to allow that to happen for breweries? So let's start digging into that. The first section, I just want to talk about creativity, right? For me, this is paramount. One of the things I loved about brewing when I got into it was that, like, alchemy, that creativity and the science aspect of it, and where those two meet. And so one of the things that when I get on these calls with brewers, I go, man, it really sounds like the life is kind of being sapped out of them because they're just getting beat up. And I just want to be able to see them get back to having fun, get back to like what they loved about it when they were home brewing or things like that. And so, constantly kind of hear a version of this, like, I'm stuck in fight or flight mode. I'm just trying to survive. I can't be creative right now, right? And to me, I would argue, like, I'm not negating someone's feelings by any means. I can sympathize with you. I certainly was feeling this when COVID first hit and I was managing my brewery. I couldn't think 30 seconds ahead of me. But I want to encourage you that the more we can touch back into that, connect back into that creativity that got us here, that's what's going to help fuel growth and profit. When I talk to breweries these days, and I had a conversation earlier today, it's like, yeah, we're actually doing really good. And they were like guilty about it. But you can tell they're still tapped into that creativity. They're still innovating, and they're finding ways to make that happen despite all the stuff that they're coming up against. And so, just to remind you, right, obviously brewing's still a creative pursuit, but these breweries that fight against that fight or flight mentality, those are the ones that I'm seeing out there succeeding, growing despite all the, the constant negative pressures against them, right? And Ross, you see this too when you're talking to all these breweries?
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I feel like there's a place for both making peace with the challenge as a source of your creativity, right? As like a infinite fountain.
Yeah.
But getting outside of that is super important, and it's really, I think it's really cool that the industry is a place now where we're having kind of this reckoning about self-care and what that dialogue looks like and how it affects creativity. It's interesting too, I was actually talking with the Scarlet Labs dudes, kind of about a further concept of how we found ourselves here from both a flavor standpoint and trends in the industry, but also consumption habits and the rest of it, and it's about perception of flavor, really. They've got a data set that shows that as stress increases, your ability to even perceive and experience gustatorial, sensorial experiences changes. And so I think for people that are on the front lines of creating and using this as a means of conveyance, it's like more important than ever to get outside of that and foster creativity however you can. Whether that's like whatever. I'm on the road a lot. I bring my skateboard with me everywhere. Because if I don't like bring it, and I'm not gonna get it. So like that's the one thing I can allow myself. So we all need to find those things, because you'll be having whatever your moment is, and something will stoke you out. And that's what matters. Like it's not about like it is about business plans and stuff, but you have to connect with the infinite in such a way that it resonates with other people, and you don't get that through spreadsheets and all the rest of shit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think it's about a perspective shift. It's like, you can see all these problems that you're facing, but also sometimes overcoming those problems are what can lead to that creativity. Which I think another way to say what you were saying, like, taking those things, how can I overcome this? This is a problem that I need to face. Oh, cool, now I'm doing something new. I mean, I know Jeff at Industrial Arts, like, I don't think 5-6 years ago he was going to be planning to do a ton of non-alcoholic beer, but there they are. And it's now a whole new thing that they're doing. So I always like to base some of my stuff in data. Being part of Untapped as part of our family brands, I can always call on some of those check-in data just to kind of see how things are going. And even despite, like, I was kind of surprised. I knew it wasn't as bad as people tend to say, like, oh, people are, they're not doing as much check-ins, or they're not doing as many varieties and stuff, but I thought this was kind of cool. I know the numbers may be hard, so I'll kind of pinpoint a few things, but like this is over the last 4 years, so 21 through 24. I included 25's numbers as well, just for good measure. But if you look at the third column in unique styles, people are actually drinking more styles now than they were 4 or 5 years ago. Right? People are still trying off new things. They're still experimenting with their own flavor profiles that they like. So, again, encouraging that creativity to try something maybe you've never tried before. Unique beers has been ticking up from 39,000 unique beers. And this is all based in New York, by the way. This is all filtered by New York stats. So unique beers ticked up to 42,000 from 39 in 2021. Unique users is down a little bit, but styles per user, I know that's kind of a weird metric over there with 0.000, but it's creeping up. So per user, they're trying new styles. So it's just kind of explaining through the numbers, like it backs it up. The drinkers out there, they're drinking new beers, they're drinking new styles, they're trying new things still. So to me, that says as brewers, we should still be pushing ourselves to try stuff. If we're an all lager brewery, maybe we find a way to connect that to something else, whether that's a hoppy lager. I know Jack Sabby did that, I think, pretty well when they were on the forefront of the hoppy lager, movement with the IPLs and things like that. And then, for me, and Ross, I want you to chime in here too. One of the things that I always say is, how do we actually track this? And one of the things I whether you're using Ollie, you're using a different system, you're using spreadsheets, is take it and go, hey, we're going to use this new product from Abstrax. Well, I think it was Quantum we were talking about. Yeah, you should talk about that in just a second. But okay, we're going to get 5% efficiency potentially on this. How does that actually affect our recipe? So let's take our recipe and look at it and just double check that bottom line, right? Because at the end of the day, maybe that product is going to cost something, but if you get that 5% efficiency back, you're getting a couple extra sixtels, a couple extra half barrels, depending on how much you're producing. That's huge, right? So now you're flexing your creativity, but you're also monitoring that profit, that bottom line. So you're hitting both nails on the head, right? We're allowing ourselves to be creative, but also paying attention to that profit and having, as Julie said today, the big boy, big girl pants of managing the business, which is also important. So Ross, I'll kick it to you. As you're out in the market talking with some of these breweries, like a product like Quantum, what's that conversation like around creativity and how people are exploring some of these new hop-derived products?
Yeah, I think we occupy a pretty unique space in the industry because we are essentially complete outsiders who have crashed in with the technology that we have. So I think there's a lot of excitement around the innovation that it offers, but Quantum specifically is such a stacked value add at every level of the proposition that it's natural for people to be attracted to it, and it's had huge resonance because of that. But it is so unlike any other product in the market that I mean, I'm not knocking homebrew shops, but we've all been to homebrew shops for the last 20 years, and it's kind of a barren wasteland of the same stuff. We all, whatever. So I think just seeing something new is special for a brewer. And like, I designed it as a brewer, wanting to like not get a soup can of advanced products and like feel like I was getting a user experience. And even that in itself, I think sparks creativity.
Yeah.
Like you're seeing that like we care about you not just getting a soup can or whatever. So like the product itself, the whole everything, I think, is just kind of a platform for that. So people are just stoked on all of it. And that's quantum, that's the base of it. There's a lot of like economic factors to it. So like yield loss is like the easiest one. It's like, yeah, you're gonna get back yield immediately. You're gonna get back crazy amplitude that you wouldn't otherwise. For like large enterprise customers, actually for everybody in the world, actually, if you have 132 pounds of any hop, we can turn it into an advanced product for you. So like, I think part of that too is about our desire not to gatekeep information, which is like part of innovation as well. Like if, you know, the greatest technology is held by 4 or 5 people, what good does that do to everybody? And again, us being outsiders to the industry see the value in that and kind of how archaic the systems that have been built up are. So just like representing that in what we do, I think is the first stage of like inspiration.
Yeah.
And then you start adding like the stuff where like, oh, let's bang out a spreadsheet and it's like now 30% more efficient, and you know, we can process our own stuff and make more money off flagship beers, or we can, when you go through this toll processing process, depending on the content of oil in the hops or whatever, you give us 1 pound, you get back 5 pounds in liquid equivalent. So you start getting thousands of pounds of this stuff. Dudes are able to like dial back contract exposure and stuff. And like it's this, we see ourselves as this kind of regulatory force, like a balancing force maybe, and you know, really hope that that's what inspires people to like get outside of their head.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. On Wednesday at Common Groups, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was like, yeah, I'm talking with my friend Ross from Abstrax. He goes, dude, I just got some of their products, like their social media just been blowing me up on Facebook and Instagram. He says, so he said, I'm just going to try some. And I think he got like 2 of the sample pieces. And he's like, I just threw them into a beer to see what happened. He goes, it's insane. And so he was like, the thing that kind of like resonated with me is you could see that light. Like I talk about that when people are like stressed, they kind of like clam up. But he was excited to try and like experiment and see where that he could take his IPAs and the flavor with those based off that one little thing. He just bought a vial off of, I forget if it was Facebook or Instagram, but it's like now he's like excited to reinvent that beer and try something new, which was exactly what I wanted to try and bring to everybody today. So the second section, and by the way, again, just anybody wants questions, please speak up, make it a conversation. So innovating for technique, and this is slightly different for me than, you know, the creative side, because, you know, we've got all these things coming against us. We've got all, you know, vendor prices increasing, you know, aluminum can tariffs. You know, I don't know if anyone started to feel that, but I know that's coming down. Hop acreages are down, so maybe we need more hop-derived products because that hop market's going to be a little bit volatile for anybody who's buying spot hops. And so, like, how can we safeguard our business? How can we protect what we're doing and not start just losing our margin and just go, oh, okay, well, now my cases are going to cost $2 more, right? So how can we innovate, which I think is a version of creativity, right? So the kind of like brief version I'm hearing from people is like I'm being squeezed in every aspect and I don't know where to start and what resources to call on. And so again, you kind of go into that fight or flight mode and you're just kind of like clam up. And it's just, I'm just going to try and weather the storm instead of taking it step by step to analyze your operations. I mean, Spencer, you do a ton of this stuff when it comes to like mash efficiencies. Like how can you squeeze out just a little bit more with less, right? How can we do more with less? And, you know, again, just encourage you, I'm probably going to say it 20 more times today, but use your vendors, use your, you know, your industry partners to help figure some of these solutions out for you. And for me, you know, the brewery, again, going back to the people I talk to that I hear that are doing really well in this time of stress, right? It's because they took time to examine their business operations. They sat there and went, okay, let's look at our efficiency this week. Okay, next week, let's look at our on-premise versus off-premise. I was talking to someone from the BA a couple of weeks ago. I thought this was a really interesting data point, and it goes back to the need to like look at these sales processes. Was they were seeing for pale ales, lower 5%-ish, hoppy beers, things like that. They were seeing a lot more draft for that style of beer. But double IPAs, the draft had gone way down and was up more in package. And so they're kind of thinking that people are wanting to drink more of the low ABV stuff on premise, but then take the double IPA home. Okay, well, how does that factor into what we're packaging when it comes to our package splits? Okay, well, maybe I'm dialing up my packages for double IPA and dropping my kegs down a lot, right? And so looking at the data to see how that filters back into our forecasting. Those are the breweries that are doing that. Those are the ones that I'm seeing do that, still maintaining that 10%, 15% growth while everyone else is just trying to survive. And a lot of that comes to control what you can control, right? If a vendor comes to you and says, hey, aluminum cans, we got the tariffs, you got to pay more per can, there's not a whole lot we can do as a brewery to fight that, right? Like we just kind of either have to accept that or we go find another vendor. So that's not something you can control. But what you can control is, do you need to put as much beer in the cans? Can you avoid packaging as many cans that are just going to sit in your walk-in, right? So taking that time to go through those numbers, that to me is a big way to you go back and you can control what you can control. And the screenshots I grabbed here, whether you're doing this in spreadsheets, this is from Ollie, but this is a production report. So you'll be able to see SAP IPA from beginning of the year to now, and you can see produced volume, what was our loss, and that's tracking loss when you're transferring, loss when you're packaging, and then you can see those trends. Like, if I was the head brewer, but now I'm moving on to do other things, and I've got an assistant person who's brewing, but now my efficiency is going off, and I'm losing a sixtel because they're just not paying attention quite as much as I used to, right? If you're not paying attention to those numbers, you lose a sixtel, then that becomes a half barrel of efficiency. That makes a huge difference when it comes to your bottom line, right? So being able to look back on those numbers in real time, and even seeing in this packaging report, seeing that, the unit cost and making sure that unit cost is staying in line. I talk to a lot of breweries that are like, oh yeah, I kind of do a cost of goods analysis like every 3 months or so. And I'm like, a lot can happen in those 3 months. Not just how or your efficiencies, but how, if you're on the spot market or, some of these things like tariffs, like, are you watching how that's affecting that cost in real time and making pivots, making changes? Maybe you have to retool a recipe. So I'll throw it to you, Ross. Like when it comes to innovation, we talked about quantum a little bit and getting those efficiencies, but what are some of those other conversations you're having with people these days, fighting off some of these price increases and challenges?
It's weird. I literally just had this realization sitting here that when I initially thought about all of the products, I kind of was thinking about them through this lens of scarcity, which then we kind of immediately found ourselves in this weird glut with millions and millions of pounds of overage and then this strange cutback and correction. And so in a strange way for us, by not really ever being beholden to the plant, we're able to occupy this space where all of the solutions that we offer are built to work in favor of the brewer. Whether that's like the hop solutions that are hop-derived extracts, which are, again, a value add on a lot of different levels. The botanically recreated stuff, which is cool because they're literal Jurassic Park, reverse engineered. We snapshot a hop more complex than anyone in the world and recreate them. They're partially hop products and then they're botanical terpenes. Again, because they're outside of the limitations and forces of markets, they're spooky cheap and they're spooky consistent. And that is huge for you guys looking for that. If you are looking to access the zeitgeist that is cannabis flavors in beer, like I will happily say that we're the only viable option to make your beer actually taste like weed, because that's where we started. Fruits, Strange Sky Farm, hugely successful for us because it's a value. It's more potent in dilution. It is a great top note. It's kind of like dry hopping, smoothie beers, aseptic purees. cutting back on that little top note of Sky Farm. It's like every one of the products, it kind of exists, not kind of, it does exist to add value and like that creativity piece to everybody in this room.
Without sacrificing quality, which I think is a big one, right? Like,
Yeah.
when you and I were first talking, one of the things that struck me was when you're taking, somebody you talked about earlier, if you have a certain amount of hops that you're contracted for, you can take them, extract, and build your own hop oil out of that. And one of the cool things about that is, right, you're actually taking, if you've selected that at the farm, like you have that lot of hops and there's specific flavor qualities that you're trying to get out of that, well, now you can preserve that. So if that's in like a core beer where you have a very dialed in flavor and that flavor cannot vary, you can keep that flavor while still doing some of these products. So you're not sacrificing quality by any means, but you're able to realize some of those efficiency gains and some of the innovation to potentially even have more stable beers as far as flavor profiles go. So I thought that was an interesting takeaway I had from one of our first conversations. The last part here, I just want to talk about evolving for adaptation, right? You heard a lot about this. There's non-alcoholic stuff and THC seltzers and like all these things. And, that to me, from what I hear from a lot of people, is part of the scariest thing because it's a lot of unknowns, right? Like, I don't even know how to produce an NA beer, or I don't even know where to start with THC seltzer or anything like that. But that's where I would really kind of encourage you. That's where the vendors are for. Right, I talked with, let's move to the thing and I'll get to the vendors in a second. So the industry is changing so fast, right? Consumer preferences. I can't think about all that other stuff. I'm just going to stick to what I know. I'm just going to, I produce this beer and I've been producing this beer since 2012 and that's the beer that I'm going to continue to produce, right? I would challenge you that, have your sales continue to be what they were in 2012 because I'm not so sure they would be. And so how do you embrace these things? How do you adapt? And I love this quote. I mean, Charles Darwin, think of you what as well, but I think this quote is very powerful, right? It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that's most adaptable to change. And I think we have to embrace that as brewers right now. We don't have to sacrifice what we're doing when we're brewing beer, but I think there is points that we do have to recognize. I need to have some non-alcoholic options, and whether I'm bringing that in as a source product or maybe I'm doing that myself, or THC seltzers. These are the things that we got to start embracing and adapting because that's what's going to keep our businesses surviving. With the non-alcoholic boom, just some of the numbers, it's pretty plain, right? Like these Gen Z, Gen A, whatever the next one is, they're coming up and they view alcohol differently. And this chart pretty much says it, right? Like just the alcohol consumption can be bad for the health, right? So if we're producers of alcohol, how do we adapt to that? And the cool thing that I really like about this is, Berkeley East, if you haven't seen, they have a YouTube series all about producing NA beer and the products they have. I talked with the two women up at the Omega Yeast booth, and they said they're having tons of conversations with people. I think she's even talking right now, so if you... Of course, you're in this room, not her room, so check out the recordings afterwards because she's going to be talking a little bit about how to, produce your beer and what that process is for getting NA. So, this may be new. You've never experienced it. How do you even get started? There's a great resources for you to go to and start talking to them. I'm sure if you grab Jeff from Industrial Arts and say, hey, can I just chat for a second? I've always had great conversations with him. He's never been a gatekeeper like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
It's all about sharing that knowledge.
Dude, I have to, just because you brought him up and it's cogent to what you just said about the being adaptable. And you said start with him, not alcohol. He said to us earlier, he's like, I came to the realization that we're just a cannery. We can stuff, and like whatever the demand and where we need to be is where we will find ourselves. And I think that's pretty profound. That's pretty.
Yeah.
You have to have that realization.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, too, all those Berkeley Yeast not-out beer recipes, completely organically, they were just like, your stuff makes it better. So all of those are heavily featuring our stuff. Was that by design? Did you know that?
No, well, I think you probably jogged my memory about it in our conversations. But I like Julie's analogy today too, right? And to take it a step further, if you ever see actors, I think she was mentioning Kenneth Branagh in Wild Wild West. Happens all the time if you didn't know, where they have to do this one movie that they really don't want to do, because they're going to be able to make 3 other movies that they really do want to make. And so, that is a little bit of that perspective that we're going to have to take as brewers is like, hop water, seltzer, that is not something that gets me up to go to the job every day, but it is going to allow me to have my job, right? And so those are the type of perspective shifts.
Is there a world where you would like if you were back in it, like would you just work it? What if you were designing a hop water now? Like, would you go for something that stokes you out, or what the market?
Yeah, well, that's where I would change that perspective of like, okay, instead of going, I have to brew, hop water today. Okay, well, why don't I find a way that excites me?
Yeah.
Right? How do I bring that back to that first section of like creativity? Is like, how do I find a product like what you guys have, or one of the other vendors, and go, okay, well, I have to do this. Why don't I actually try and find a way that this excites me?
Yeah.
And actually makes me feel like I'm doing something worthwhile, right? That's a great point. And the RTD wave, right? Like that's not going anywhere. I thought this was a good graph just to show you kind of like in scope how powerful the RTD wave is, right? So they were valued at 1.15 billion in 2024 and expected to go to 2.23 billion worldwide by 2029. Like it's just going to continue to grow. And so, as breweries explore other licenses, whether that's distilling license, cidery license, I was talking to the guy at Indian Ladder Farms, and they're talking about how they can do cocktails with their cider. I thought, that's such a great idea. Like, you can have a cidery license and then start working on cocktails, but with cider as your base, as opposed to, say, a spirit. And I thought, that's such a smart idea, a good way to use the creativity facing the problem that they're seeing. And just, other things. We talked about THC cocktails. One of the things I've talked about with Paul a little bit is like, how are we feeling, New York State is going to adopt to legality. It's a little bit different in other countries because or other states because we already allowed the hemp licenses and stuff like that. So I hear what I understand, don't know too much, but there's a little bit of a fight as far as like where these licenses are going to go. But I, crazy enough, had a bunch of conversations with people in Minnesota recently. There's a brewery doing 1,000 barrels a year of THC seltzer. It's just flying off the shelves. And another sales rep told me in the matter of 6 months, like a whole spot on the shelf is now just THC seltzers. So the world is looking for them. Are we going to rise up and start producing them? Like you were just talking about, like instead of going, I got to make a THC seltzer, cool. How do I adapt that, make that part of my brand?
Yeah,
right?
do it on your terms.
Yeah.
Like, whatever. That's what makes stuff cool.
Yeah.
Like,
but
if you can interpret stuff through your lens and make it cool to you, that's what other people will find cool.
Yeah, and that's where they'll resonate. That's a good point. I didn't add that in here, but I mean, if you've ever read the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek, I'm a huge Simon Sinek fan. And everything you do, anything that I'm talking about today, should all go back to what your brand is. Why is your business out there doing what you do? Everything should tie back to that. Because then your customers, they're going to resonate with that. So whether that's a THC seltzer, whether that's a cider, or a non-alcoholic beer, or something else, take it from the lens, that perspective you're talking about of like, what do we do? And how can we then bring that to and solve that problem? Hop waters. I've been loving how the hop waters have been coming out. Because, let's say, to be honest, the first version of hop waters out there weren't the greatest, but they're, I think Industrial Arts does a great one. I had an interesting sort of change of perspective. I was down in Texas for the Brewers Conference down there in February, and I was visiting St. Elmo Brewing, and I just didn't even think about it, but my friend who wasn't drinking, he goes, why don't we get we closed out our tab, we had a couple beers with the owner, and he goes, why don't we grab a couple of hop waters to go? And I was like, holy crap, I hadn't even thought about that. What a great way to upsell a customer as they're walking out the door. Well, if I need a road soda, why don't it be a non-alcoholic something that has good flavor and I can sip on legally as I'm leaving and going, on my day. Great way to add a can or a 4-pack, right? Where it's not just alcohol. And I thought, there's another place where hop seltzers really come into play and can provide a lot of value. And again, drive profit, right? Because that's ultimately what we got to keep doing. And, a big one too is, I know New York's working on allowing multiple licenses over places, is start exploring whether you're going to produce cider, or you're going to produce wine. I know, Grimm did that recently, and they have some great wines. The Physica, right? Physica, yeah, the Physica wines, which I had one in the can, and I was like, man, I've never had a canned wine that actually tastes good. This is delicious. I put it in front of someone who's going up for their sommelier test. I didn't tell her it was from a can, and she loved it. And I was like, "That's from a can," and her mind was blown. But like these are the ways that we're scratching different itches and we're trying new things. And as everyone's talked about in this conference so far, Julie mentioned it today in her talk. It's about meeting the needs of the customers. Customers are looking to try not just different beers, but different products, different drinking preferences. And especially when a big group comes in, they may not all want beer. They may want to try, a wine drinker, a cider drinker, plus a beer drinker. And how can you fit all of those needs and make them all feel welcome when they come into the tap room? What are some other ways that you've been exploring that stuff with customers, Ross?
I mean, last night we were at the Boozy Noon, having boozy ice cream and Jameson shots, and literally I saw Hoplark. I asked for one on the way. They were out, but yeah, all of those things and then some for sure. THC is an ever evolve as someone that participates heavily in the legal side and what we do in our vape business for the terpenes. For those that don't know, Abstrax is the largest terpene company in the world for the vape market. If you've had a vape pen in the last 6 years, like 80% chance it was our terpenes in it. So that's what informs all the work that we do in beer, which is also then kind of conveniently tied back to everything we do in THC stuff. But like you were saying, all of that's very much, I think, a pathway that's about choosing what you want to be as a brand, what you want to represent, because as you've seen and mentioned in Minnesota, it's like the opportunity was there, so the people that want in are in, and they're in a big way. And that's like, and we were talking about this earlier too, about like my own career path from pre-cannabis to cannabis to beer or whatever, and those kind of like choices that you make, those are what are going to get you on your pathway and connect you to the people you're meant to be connected to.
Yeah.
So like we do interact and like supply and power lots of Delta 9 brands. There's a ton of hop waters. Like all the hop water solutions are absolutely built for hop waters. Circle back to really important in THC anything to have terpenes included. That's kind of like a horse and carriage sort of deal. THC is the gas pedal and terpenes are the steering wheel, and without the two together, you have like an unmodulated function. Though terpenes do actually function on their own, but with all of the THC cocktail stuff, like we're seeing a huge uptick in that and the use of our stuff there.
Yeah, the brew gas is one of the main.
For people that want stuff to taste like weed, for sure. Yeah, but yeah, the modulatory functions as well. We have. As terpenes do interact with your endocannabinoid system, whether or not you have cannabinoids in your system, we've developed a line of terpenes to specifically induce mood orientation, like relaxed and peaceful and inspired and things like that. So, other ways for people to achieve effect outside of alcohol. We've worked with cideries, we work with wineries, and several distillery projects. So it's like we do kind of tap into whatever. Like if you're making any beverage of any kind, this is a new way of approaching flavor development from, like say, both a technical approach and then just an inspiration too.
So, and I think one thing that's cool too, and it works at both of our positions, is it's not just that we know our individual product really well and can talk to you about how you can potentially use our product, but we're out there talking. Like I talk to dozens of breweries every week, and you're seeing breweries all the time talking about your products. And it can be like, oh, you know what? I talked to this brewery the other day, and they're doing this. That seemed like it could be really a good way for you guys to approach this problem. And so it's that sharing of knowledge. So it's not just about, the vendors are, we know our product. Hopefully we should. That would be primary focus number one. But we're also talking to breweries all over the country, and we want to share that knowledge with you guys. So don't hesitate to ask us about that stuff. Use us as those resources. And then the last thing I'll just say, going back to the data, is like, do that, try that, flex those muscles, try those new things, and then see how they play. So I started pulling some of the reports, and you can see here, this is a depletion report, and it shows, okay, I'm looking at distillery versus beer and how the different products are moving. And I can understand, okay, how many cases are remaining, my average depletion. And then the bottom one is a different way of looking at it. This is by units, that one's by dollar amount. And so I can understand, okay, how these products are moving. Maybe I have a cidery, maybe I have a distillery and a brewery. Compare the three and see, what's making money right now. Is my cidery picking up and my brewery's going down a little bit? Maybe that means I need to invest a little bit of that extra capital back into the cidery and continue to build that business, right? Continually go back to use those reports, whether it's spreadsheets or something like Ollie or a different system. Continually go back and reference that data and start to make those decisions. I always encourage you, if you're going to make any decision, check the data and make that confident decision based on what you're seeing through the numbers that you guys are tracking. So I'll close it up here, and please, happy to sit around and answer questions, but fight that fight or flight mentality that I can see people get stuck in, because your customers, the drinkers, they're going to resonate when you guys are being creative, when you guys are innovating and you're producing new products through that lens of what your brand is. Optimize your operations and allow the vendors to help you out. Like that, again, I go back to any brewery I talk to, my goal is to help you build a better business. I believe Ollie can help do that, but ultimately my goal is to help you build a better business. And I know, same way with you just want to help people make better beer with your products, right? Embrace that change, remain nimble. I mean, to me, the word nimble has been my key word that I've focused on ever since COVID, because, it seems like anything and everything is hitting us from all angles. And so the more you can stay nimble, the more you can adapt, those are the ones that are going to survive. Those are the ones that are going to stick around and not just be here for the next year or two, but be here for the next 10, 20, 30 years, right? And then, to wrap it all up, by focusing on all this stuff, those are the breweries that I see talking day to day. Those are the ones that are thriving, not just treading over water, right? And I show up and talk to them, and they're like, yeah, we're seeing, we went from 1,200 barrels last year, and we're up to 2,500 this year. And we found, we opened up new distribution markets, and we're exporting overseas now, and they're finding those new ways and still growing despite this stressful environment that we're all operating out of. So, I've mentioned it several times, but I love chatting with everyone. I know Ross is the same, so we want to hear from you guys. Like, feel free to snapshot this, or I've got business cards. I know you do too. Like, we can have a conversation. We don't have to, I'm not going to necessarily just sell you a product. Like, I want to talk about how you guys can run a better business. Focus on brewing better beer. Focus on making a profit with that beer. And then, hopefully I can provide a little bit of knowledge, because I've been around a little bit, but the best thing is I talk to breweries every single day, all over the country, Canada, even Australia sometimes, which is crazy. So, cool. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the time.
I would just like to first say thank you, Kyle. That was awesome. And Ross. Kyle's a rock star. If you don't know him, he does have a great product. I'm not trying to pitch it. So much so that I actually tried to poach you and pull you away from your company to work for New York State Brewers Association. And I just want to commend you for bringing Ross, because you brought to New York State a level of intelligence and innovation that we don't normally see from the West Coast. So I commend you for bringing Ross.
That's the most East Coast compliment I've ever seen. I live in Brooklyn too. That's amazing.
So you understand.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was a compliment.
Does anybody have any questions, ideas, thoughts? Happy to jam for a few minutes. Yeah?
How would you recommend innovating without a pilot batch system?
I think
Do it small? Like super small?
I would say, first start with, if you're on a 15 barrel system or a 10 barrel system, like how low can you go before it becomes unfeasible to actually brew?
Yeah.
I worked at a 30 barrel brewery, and I was like, you guys, I don't think we need to brew 30 barrels of everything that we make. Like, sometimes 15 barrels of this is going to be plenty. Let's start there, especially for a double IPA that we've never brewed before. But I think it comes down to some of the prep work, honestly. It's running the products, talking to some of the vendors that are providing the products, and have a deep understanding of what you're going to be using. On the bottom line, I think it's running the numbers, like I showed one of the earlier slides, of like actually running the numbers of, okay, this is what my material costs are going to be, so does this even financially make sense to even go down this path, right? Like, forget scaling up to our normal size, but does this beer make sense financially for me to even approach? Like, I remember the days where people would be throwing ungodly amounts of hops in their dry hops, and it's just like, talked to a brewery the other day. They said, yeah, we kind of gave up on efficiency. We're around like 25%. And I was like, can we just pause there for a second? Wait, you're only at 25% efficiency? Like, let's go back here and let's figure that out. But to that point, like if you're doing a pilot system and you don't have a pilot system, but you're trying a pilot batch, just do the prep work, do the work beforehand, so you have a good idea of what you're getting out of it. Because you obviously know your system, right? So then know your ingredients, know the costs. Now you really kind of figured out where you're headed.
Picking one variable at a time, not really breaking the mold.
Yeah, that was like the thing, dude. Is when I asked like, how big is your system, and then how well do you know your recipes? Because it's like,
Sorry?
how big is your system, and then how like in your recipes are you?
10-barrel system, and I'm a pretty new brewer. I've been at my brewery for the past 3 years, but I just started brewing, so I'm really starting to get acclimated to just brewing on the 10-barrel system. Coming from used to be a home brewer, then I was like cellar for 2 years and packaging, and now I'm finally just sitting with the brewers getting up on the brew stand, and but also wanting to do some new exciting things for my brewery, because it seems like we're kind of just going through the motions a little bit.
Well, a good place to start there, it's kind of coming from more of the scientific approach, is take one of those recipes and do a slight tweak.
Yeah.
So it's not going to change the beer, right? We're not talking the whole different brand, but just a slight tweak. Maybe the way you utilize the hops, or a different hop, or a different grain. Just small little tweaks, small little iterations of that. Because for you as a brewer, as you're making that path from home brewing up to now professional brewing, but specifically on a 10-barrel scale, right? You're going to start to understand the nuances of that 10-barrel system. And so now when you approach totally different recipes, you know your system inside and out. You know when you walk up there and you do this, you're going to get that result, right? And because you're taking that every single batch and just making minor tweaks and seeing how it plays, that's where you'll really get your chops you can predict what's going to happen when you try a completely new recipe.
Don't forget your roots. Go back to home brewing and experiment there and scale it up.
Yeah.
Actually, like,
And talk to other brewers too. Like, maybe there's other people on 10-barrel systems that maybe even have your system, and they can give you some tips on that too.
And I work on production analytics, and it's a really common experience to come into a brewery and everyone is just going through their regular rhythm. They just make the core brands over and over again. And if they were to make a tweak, they may not actually be able to see how that affects their mash efficiency or their dissolved oxygen or their package yield, bright yield, whatever it's going to be. But as soon as you come to that brewery with some analytics, you can actually measure those 2% improvements, and it becomes much more satisfying to make a tweak on every single brew, whether you're changing the salts or the hop rate slightly, or you're going to change the color a little bit, the IBUs. But you don't have sensory setup for a sensory change, and you can't see amongst 5 people that people have preferred it since you made that change. They can all get kind of lost. So the tweaks get helped by analytics.
Yeah, I double down on that, Spencer. Like, you're talking about like canning runs, right? Like, if you're able to get an extra, you make a tweak on the canning line because you were talking to someone, they said, we did this, you should try that, and you really dial in, and now all of a sudden you've got a third less empties or low fills, right, at the end of the day, and all of a sudden your package cost is going down because you're getting an extra couple cases out of the run. I mean, I don't think any owner is going to fight back against that if you're able to make them a few extra dollars every time a batch is brewed, right? So going back to that, if you have to talk to an owner, a head brewer, or somebody else, and talk to them about that, go with those analytics, have that data prepared. Again, back with the scientific methods, right? Is start with your hypothesis, try it, and then be able to report on those findings.
Yeah, my interpretation of maybe your question too was like, especially with something like liquid products or whatever, you can probably dose a single keg or a brink of an existing batch of beer and just try that on very small scale. Just get permission to I want to put some terpene extracts in a single keg of our IPA and then taste that alongside the normal version.
Yeah, this is what I love, right? That's a great idea. And that's why these conferences, it's not just about learning from people that may or may not know what they're talking about. It's your compatriots that are out there doing it with you.
Yeah,
PJ, sorry, I'll come back to you. PJ first.
No, yeah, talking to get on a prank, I bet you got a corny.
We got drinks.
Yeah, but yeah, we actually still work 20 barrel. But kind of like how I was saying for 30, like we don't need to make 30 barrels of everything. Like sometimes 15 is the right amount. And but we actually we had an opportunity to get a 3-barrel uni tank really cheap, and it's just like really like kind of popped for us. It's like, man, there's so much cool shit we can do with this. So like we're gonna do a lot of like word side streaming, just playing with stuff. But yeah, we had a great chat with Barb and Ross yesterday about trying some Abstrax products in take a SKU or at least some work that we're already making and like just try something new with it. And I've got a list that I'm like, I don't know how the hell I'm gonna make all this stuff, but like there's all these like experiments you want to try.
And if you didn't know, there's a ton of used equipment out.
Take the words out of my mouth.
So little half barrel pilot systems, they're not that hard to come by. I know a brewery that sold a 7-barrel system for like $500 because they just could not get rid of it. So there's stuff out there. So I didn't want to skip your question or your comment.
Yeah, I mean, I was just pretty unrelated, but I was also kind of curious. I'm just thinking about it because of innovation. One thing Luke's been doing that's been working really well for us is gluten-reduced beers now. It's something kind of new that people aren't really like dabbling in yet.
Yeah.
It's hard to gauge quite yet for actually getting people that are very gluten sensitive trying, but even just the positive feedback that we're willing to take that risk.
Yeah.
It's been awesome.
Yeah, that's great. That's one I didn't include, but yeah, thank you for mentioning that too. And I know there's vendors that can help with that too. I don't know how exactly your guys' process, but I know there's vendors out there that can talk to you about how to reduce the gluten or, have zero gluten, there's some of those testings and things like that. Anybody else? Cool. Well, I appreciate you guys.
Thank you very much. That was excellent.
Let's go have some beers upstairs.